The FNAF timeline is infamously complicated. So many locations, restaurants, plots of land, characters, all in different places, time periods. You get the idea. It's a mess. But what if it didn't have to be? What if there was a way to unite everything into one plot? Not just a story plot, but one plot of land. What if I told you there is? Because while I was on stream with some of my FNAF theorist friends, we found a detail that ties together every single game in the franchise, from the original era all the way to the modern games, and connects all of them to one single area of land. What started out as Murray's Costume Manor, but later became the basis for all the iconic locations you know and love. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because there's a lot to this theory. This revelation has the potential to tie everything together neatly and explain some of the weirdest inconsistencies the franchise has to offer. So, without further ado, I'm WitheredCircle, and this is FazPlot Theory. So, how did we find this supposed insane revelation, and what does it even mean? While overanalyzing Help Wanted 2 on stream, I was playing the night shift segment set in Sister Location's private room, the room that leads us to that game's fake ending, when I noticed that the map layout was weirdly familiar. I pointed out that it lined up almost exactly with the layout of the prototype Freddy Fazbear's from Secret of the Mimic. In Secret of the Mimic, in the parachute ending, you go down an elevator that leads you to the research and development portion of MCM, that contains a work-in-progress Freddy Fazbear's Pizza that William Afton and Henry Emily worked on alongside Edwin Murray. This pizzeria has prototype versions of the main 4 characters, and the Fredbear and Spring Bonnie Springlock suits. But most importantly, notice the layout of this location. One big room behind it, followed by a smaller one up ahead, 2 large halls with rooms off to each side, and a vent running through the middle connecting to a security office between it all. A dead ringer for the private room map. While this area is meant to mimic the FNAF 1 pizzeria layout, it's also oddly similar to the private room layout. Note the vent running across the middle, which is something the FNAF 1 pizzeria lacks. But that's not all. In case you're wondering if this private room layout was exclusive to Help Wanted 2, it wasn't. It's identical to the layout in the original Sister Location Night Shift. Let's take a step back and remember what the function of the private room even was. In Sister Location, we're obviously introduced to Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals, the underground location that serves as a base of operations for the Funtime animatronics and the experiments that Afton conducted with Souls, Remnant, and Eternal Life. But on night 5, if the player, Michael Afton, doesn't listen to Circus Baby's instructions and goes right instead of left to the scooper room, you end up in an area called the Private Room, a weird monitoring chamber filled with gas canisters, monitors, and most importantly, a direct connection to the FNAF 4 nightmare rooms. Typing 1983 into the keypad off to the side of the office reveals detailed close-ups of the FNAF 4 rooms, the bedroom, and the plush trap hallway. It's obvious that these rooms were used by William Afton to monitor someone occupying the FNAF 4 complex. We know that these rooms functioned as nightmare experiments that Afton used to study fear and the power of souls, which means the private room is literally William Afton's private office. But that's not all, because on Sister Location's second night, we get access to the break room map, a detailed blueprint of the entire rental facility that shows long corridors leading from the bunker to 3 key locations. The FNAF 4 experiment rooms connected to the private room, the plush trap hallway connected to Ballora Gallery, and the neighborhood from the FNAF 4 minigames next to Fredbear's Family Diner. This last area connects to Circus Baby's gallery. All of these are labeled as Observation 1, 2, and 3 in the map. So, obviously, these 3 key areas are connected to Sister Location. But why did I bring up Murray's Costume Manor and the prototype Freddy Fazbear's? Well, it's because they're the key to tying all of this together. After making that connection, T-Dread's duo process theory and I decided to enter Secret of the Mimic to go out of bounds and get an aerial view of the map to see what other connections we could find. And find something we did. Remember how the private room has a near identical layout to the Proto Freddy's office? Well, what if they were the same room? Operating under the assumption that they were, we tried to connect the private room to the FNAF 4 nightmare experiments to see where on the map they were located. So we went forward from where Proto Freddy's would be on the map, then to the right, just like the break room blueprint shows us, and ended up right next to Edwin Murray's house. This is where the puzzle pieces started connecting. We find out more towards the end of Secret of the Mimic that Edwin Murray's home and the entire MCM factory were taken by William Afton as property of Fazbear Entertainment, even though he promised to leave it alone. Software development in the entire MCM catalog. We would love to bring you on as a lead engineer. Although we now technically own the land, we would never touch the house your parents built. We feel this offer has been more than fair, considering how far behind you are. It's just too much for you to handle alone. We are waiting for your response." In Secret of the Mimic, inside Edwin's house, we find a recreation of the FNAF 4 bedroom. Not identical, but definitely meant to be similar. This line traces a direct connection from the private room to the experiment chambers, and also from Proto Freddy's to Edwin's house, in the exact same alignment, even showing the planned spots where the nightmare animatronics are meant to be. This line is identical to the Mr. Helpful train that we take to get to Edwin's house from Proto Freddy's, further strengthening the connection. If we continue this logic and draw a line from where Baby's gallery would be to the theoretical location of the Fredbear's Family Diner from the minigames, we come directly to a small town right outside Murray's Costume Manor. This is the only town in the entire map, and I think it's very intentionally placed, because this town is the infamous Hurricane, Utah. In the FNAF 4 minigames, it's pretty obvious that the action happens in a town. There's a sidewalk, sewer grates, cars, and plenty of kids and guests at Fredbear's. So this line also lines up perfectly with both the sister location bunker and the underground MCM facility. The 1983 Fredbear's being this close to MCM also allows Scott to retroactively explain one of the weirdest lines from FNAF 4. If you go to the left side of the street leading from Fredbear's to your house, you see a little girl with red pigtails, who says that the animatronics come alive at night and that they hide your body and never tell anyone. At first, it made no sense. This bite obviously happened in 1983, but the missing children incident likely has to happen after Bite victim's death in 1985. So, is Pigtail Girl a time traveler? I don't think Scott gave it much thought when he first made FNAF 4, but Secret of the Mimic allowed him to course correct, and showed the animatronics in the facility coming to life at night and hiding bodies across the factory. Clever. Anyway, our proposition after finding all this was simple. What if the underground part of Murray's was taken by Afton and turned into his sister location facility? One of the biggest questions we theorists had ever since sister location came out is how Afton could afford to build such a giant underground bunker. But if it wasn't him, and it was just a part of an old factory, the pieces start clicking into place. And it didn't end there. Remember the sister location custom night cutscenes where Michael Afton's got entered inside of him? Notice how Michael is leaving the Circus Baby's facility and walking through a town all the way to his home. Lining up with where the elevator he uses to enter Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals would be, we get a neat path from there to the town where we already established Fredbear's is. The Circus Baby's elevator could even be the same as the elevator from the Welcome Show, for one pretty weird reason. Help Wanted 2's base game has two endings, one you get for beating all the minigames and getting the 7 Fast Force figures, and one if you collect all 6 memory dolls and play the Princess Quest 4 arcade. If you do the latter ending, you go for a VR version of the game up until the very end, where you meet an old man who takes your Vanny mask and replaces it with a green Glitchtrap plush, saying, "It is a fair trade." After this, you go into the sister location elevator, Moon takes the Glitchtrap plush from you, and you watch as Vanny defeats Glitchtrap. When the game first came out, the question on everyone's mind was very simple. What the fuck is this about? But now, with Secret of the Mimic, it's a lot more straightforward. Think about the elevator we're going into. The entrance to the sister location bunker, which we already established is an upgraded version of the MCM facility. Moon is heavily tied to Edwin Murray thanks to Sleepy Moon and the Moon.exe minigame, and this elevator leading us to an area heavily involving him and the Mimic ties this all together even more. The Circus Baby's elevator is definitely in the same place as the one we use in the parachute ending. Back to Fredbear's and Hurricane, this all explains why we even see this town imagery in the first place. Steelwell and Scott put this town here for a very specific reason, to tie this location to the original games. But let's go back to the private room for a second. Originally, this was the room where Edwin Murray stored F10 and 4, the Mimic program that took on the personality of his dead wife Fiona. F10 is positioned in front of the vent we found earlier and is surrounded by monitors manufactured by a company called Philium Co. This isn't the first time we hear of this company either. All the way back in the first Help Wanted VR game, we saw Philium Co monitors in most of the offices, and of course, in the sister location private room in Help Wanted 2. These computers aren't stock assets either, they're deliberately named and placed items that Steelwell made for these games. This is when we became convinced that this Proto Freddy's area also became the Circus Baby's bunker. But keep in mind that Proto Freddy's isn't the only underground part of Murray's Costume Manor. There's still the Tiger Room and the Moon Basement. We know Edwin started an ambitious underground tunnel project, and that MCM has a huge underground layer to it that includes all those locations. Even the underground doll hospital could go on to inspire Circus Baby. My point is, all this could be tied to the Sea Bear's bunker, deep below ground where memories sleep. Since William owned all of the MCM land, him repurposing it into the Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals bunker makes perfect sense. But the connections don't end here. Between every night in Sister Location, Michael Afton can watch a spoof soap opera called The Immortal and the Restless, featuring Vlad the vampire and his beloved Clara. These two are often thought to represent William Afton and his wife. The setting of the story is this old house atop a hill. Comparing it to Edwin's house, the similarity is striking, and comparing it to the tone of the story the soap opera is trying to tell, it makes sense. The motif of every episode is Vlad telling Clara, "The baby isn't mine," even though it very clearly is, possibly tying it back to Afton's son, the bite victim, and his narrative parallels to David Murray, Edwin's son. There's also the fact that in the show's final episode, Clara burns down the house, just like how Edwin's house burns down at the end of Secret of the Mimic. But enough of Sister Location for now. It's time to have a look at one of the most iconic minigames in the history of this franchise. A minigame that none of us have understood until now? Midnight Motorist. This one's a classic. It shows a mustard man driving through a lonely path in the middle of a forest, passing by 3 major landmarks: a mound of dirt in a clearing, a bar called Junior's, and finally the player's house. At the mound, nothing happens. In Junior's, he's kicked out, with the green guy outside telling him he's not supposed to be there, and at his house, he finds out a child, presumably his son, ran away from home through a broken window. The identity of the main character of this minigame has been debated for a really long time by now, but thanks to the spin-off game 5 Laps at Freddy's, we can pretty much definitively prove that the player is William Afton. While on stream, we realized that the Midnight Motorist map aligned disturbingly well with the MCM layout we've gone over so far. No. We're not. There's no way we're doing Midnight Motorist. It works. No way! Oh my god! There's no way! It lines up! It lines up! The road starts at the town, snakes its way past the mounds directly above the freight area, passes by Junior's, which is placed right on top of MCM, and makes its way perfectly all the way to the house. This is when we realized we were actually onto something. Everything up until now felt like educated guessing, especially the private room aspect, but once we saw this minigame and the MCM map slot together like 2 pieces in a puzzle, it got serious. The placement of the mound in particular is very interesting. It's placed right on top of the freight/playground part of MCM, where Edwin Murray left his son David to play, and where it's implied David died. The FNAF Ultimate Guide suggested that this weird mound of dirt was an unmarked grave. So what if it was David's? I'm gonna be real. I really hate this. But it's possible Scott didn't even know what the mound was supposed to be when he made FNAF 6, so he changed its meaning in the future. Let's move on though. I don't want to talk about the mound anymore. The first question we had was this: why was Junior's right on top of where MCM would have been? Then, it hit us. Think of the name of the restaurant. Junior's. Throughout Secret of the Mimic, you can find several portraits of a man similar to Edwin in appearance. Looking in the files, we find out this painting is called Edwin SR. Edwin Sr. There's multiple tapes scattered across the game that reference the death of Edwin's dad, thus making Edwin Murray Jr. This establishment built on top of the ruins of the Costume Manor is literally Junior's. And that's not all. The reason Afton isn't allowed inside is because Junior's isn't just a random bar like some theorists thought. It's a property owned by Fazbear Entertainment. When William took possession of the land, he gave the MCM plot to the company, but kept the house on the hill for himself. He only owns the underground part later on. The position of the window in the Midnight Motorist house matches up with the path in Edwin's house. There's a direct route from the runaway's home to Junior's, and a direct route from Edwin's house to MCM. The snaking path on the way to the house in the minigames represents the turns needed to go up the hill in the actual real-world version of the house. So, not only have we got a connection between Sister Location and MCM, but also between Midnight Motorist and MCM. All these 3 elements tie together practically perfectly. But you saw the length of the video. We are far from over, because the evidence that every single location in the game is on one plot of land is piling up. In Security Breach, we find out that the Pizzaplex was built on top of an old sinkhole. Inside that sinkhole are the remains of the FNAF 6 Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, where we fight Burntrap. But below that building are the ruins of Murray's Costume Manor. You can see elements of the Springlock Assembly Room, the warehouse area, the old MCM elevators, and more when you go down there in ruin. Security Breach also features several endings involving a familiar-looking hill. The hill Gregory sits on in the 3-star ending is likely the same hill as the Lorekeeper ending grave from FNAF 6, if the tree and flowers are anything to go off of. This means it's the same hill as the one where David and Mimic sit in the painting of the pair found in Edwin's house. again tying all three major eras together. So, can FNAF 6 fit to this FazPlot narrative? Well, yeah, it can. One of the audio logs from Secret of the Mimic tells us that the Underground Freddy's project was overseen primarily by Henry Emily, the same man who goes on to orchestrate the FNAF 6 fire. If this building got turned into the Circus Baby's bunker, and was then turned into a decoy Freddy's by Henry, it explains how he has access to the sister location blueprints in the Insanity ending, why he owns Funtime technology, and how he even finds out about possession in the first place. But the damning piece of evidence is this line from Scrap Baby.
It feels like home.
Throughout the entirety of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, Baby is under the impression that the one behind the fake Freddy's is her father, William.
You don't really know who your employer is, do you? You gathered them all together in one place, just like he asked you to. All of those little souls in one place. I will make you proud, Daddy.
If the FNAF 6 location was built into the sister location bunker, it makes sense why she thinks so. After all, he owned the land, and built the bunker where she was stored. Molten Freddy, the new form of Ennard, also backs this up.
Together again!
The reason the Funtimes are drawn to this fake location is because they remember the bunker that they came from, their home. Obviously, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place is above ground, but the labyrinth where the animatronics are kept is likely beneath the location, given the giant vents that have no way to fit into any regular building. All this evidence, together with the fact that we see FNAF 6 and MCM under the Pizzaplex, makes me convinced that FNAF 6 was also constructed on this same plot of land. But that's not where the findings ended, because if you look to the modern era of the franchise, you can see even more clues for our FazPlot theory. The original Help Wanted VR game's final level is called Pizza Party, an amalgamation of previous pizzerias mixed into one by Glitchtrap. The level normally ends with you walking after Glitchtrap and getting stuffed into Freddy Fazbear. But if, in the final room, you ignore Glitchtrap and instead walk out through an employees only door, you come out in front of a massive building under construction, the framework of the Mega Pizzaplex, surrounded by a forest. Next to this building is a fenced area containing a small wooden shack and an old pickup truck. This same pickup truck later appears in the FNAF 6 area under the Pizzaplex, and is also the same as the truck from the Curse of Dreadbear DLC, but we'll get to that in a bit. It's also worth noting that in this shot, it's snowing, and in Secret of the Mimic, it starts snowing about halfway through Arnold's night. These two areas are very clearly meant to be tied together. Plus, the imagery of walking out of a restaurant and ending up in front of this giant plot of land ties back to how we found Fredbear's earlier thanks to the Breaker Room map. Help Wanted's plush trap level also contains a neat Easter egg that solidifies this more. Sometimes, a group of mini arenas, Balora's baby robot things, can appear in the hallways, and if you look at the Breaker Room map, you see that Ballora Gallery specifically is connected to the plush trap hallway. But while these tidbits from Help Wanted are interesting enough, its DLC, Curse of Dreadbear, is where this entire theory gets even better. Curse of Dreadbear is set in FallFest 83, an event theoretically hosted by Fazbear Entertainment next to a lake. Looking up to a hill, you'll see the house from the FNAF 4 menu, with a dancing glitch trap next to it. And, as we've established, the house from FNAF 4 is the same as the house from Secret of the Mimic. Matter of fact, you can actually find this exact lake in Secret of the Mimic's map. The position of the house and all the other scenery is a direct match. The old pickup truck I talked about earlier even reappears in this DLC, and you can also spot Foxy's pirate ship on the lake, a reference to the Foxy puppet show from Secret of the Mimic. The DLC also has a lot of FNAF 4 imagery in it, which lines up pretty well considering we can see the house where the nightmare experiments happened on the horizon. But here's the really insane thing. The main minigame of the Curse of Dreadbear DLC is Spooky Mansion Dreadbear. In this minigame, you're tasked with rebuilding Dreadbear's brain. Take a listen to the first thing we hear when we enter this minigame.
Welcome back to Research and Development. Today, we are using science to pervert the mysteries of life and reanimate the inanimate.
Research and development. Sound familiar? Well, it should. This is the area where the prototype Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was built, an area not too far from the main hub of the DLC. So now we have basically blatant confirmation that these lakes are in fact the same. Theorist Fazbear Entertainment, no, not that one, pointed out that in one of the secrets from Curse of Dreadbear, we can see Dreadbear rise up from the lake and slowly walk over to a barn in the hub area, then enter it. This barn contains imagery of a birthday party, and contains a very specific Easter egg. If you throw some darts scattered around at free clown posters, the barn turns purple, and the banner at the top is replaced with text saying, "It's me," a phrase famously tied to Golden Freddy. These clown posters are also oddly similar to Jackie, the face of Secret of the Mimic. This entire barn represents the connection between MCM and Fredbear's, showing the crying child's birthday party through a different lens. Dreadbear walking from the lake to the barn is a parallel to Crying Child walking from his house to Fredbear's family diner. After we found all these insane connections, we decided to call it a day and regroup our thoughts after the stream. Since then, I've come to some realizations that might help us piece together more details about this narrative, what it means, and what it could help solve. But before that, I want to talk about hamburgers. Friend of the channel Crying-Eyed made a theory not too long ago called Fazbear. The premise was simple. The Pizzaplex, FNAF 6, Murray's Costume Manor, and the sister location Bunker are all stacked on top of each other. At first, it might seem like FazPlot theory is just a lazy Fazbear rehash, but while Cryo was relishing his victory with even more Fazbear evidence, we came to the realization that FazPlot was bigger than Fazbear. Fazbear rolls with the assumption that everything's on one plot of land, but it doesn't really explain why, or what's going on around that plot of land. But using the clues we found on stream, we can piece together the narrative better, and expand our scope. That's what FazPlot is all about. Not just stating these places are on top of each other, but also explaining the context, and the surrounding areas like the Afton family house, the Nightmare Experiment house, Hurricane, Fredbear's, the lake, and so on. Speaking of the lake, Connie from Duo Process brought up that sinkholes like the one under the Pizzaplex are often caused by large bodies of water like lakes or underground canals, so this lake being this close to where the sinkhole would be didn't feel like a coincidence. Now that we've laid out the initial groundwork of FazPlot theory, let's lay it all out on the table and summarize. After Murray's Costume Manor shuts down and William Afton takes control over it, he repurposes the underground into Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals, while Fazbear Entertainment has the upper part of the facility demolished. Afton, who lives not too far away in Hurricane, Utah, takes possession of Edwin's personal house and uses the Mr. Helpful rail system to connect it to his bunker. The house later gets turned into the basis for his experiment rooms, explaining the FNAF 4 imagery in David's room. On the other side of the map is the town, Hurricane, Utah. A while back, we thought MCM might be placed in Arizona due to some newspapers scattered across the location, but those were found to be stock assets, so now we basically know for a fact that MCM is in Hurricane. Hurricane contains Fredbear's family diner and the house we see in the FNAF 4 minigames. While this house is the main Afton house, Edwin's old house is what Afton used for the nightmare experiments he'd conduct on innocent kids. Hurricane is also the destination of Michael Afton when he walks home from Circus Babies in the custom night cutscenes, going from the elevator to town. Later on, after MCM is fully demolished, it's replaced with Junior's. The identity of this establishment is unknown, but it's likely a location owned by Fazbear Entertainment. More on this later. Anyway, since we found out Midnight Motorist lines up perfectly with the MCM map, we can tie this to the house from that minigame as well. This is where we got a bit confused, but I think it's likely that the Aftons moved into this house after the missing children incident in 1985, which is likely when William was kicked out of the company. In the Silver Eyes novels, we find out that even though he was never caught, William Afton left town very quickly after the 5 dead kids he killed were reported missing, so it could totally be the same in the games. Afton, instead of sticking around Hurricane, jumped ship and moved to his other house a few miles away, remaining in hiding on top of the hill. This explains why this house is shown as the place where he lives in The Immortal and the Restless. The FNAF 6 decoy pizzeria is later built on top of the ruins of MCM, with the underground tunnels under it being the base for the labyrinth where Henry and Michael trap the scrap animatronics. The pizzeria later burns down. There's also the lake below the manor, where FallFest 83 is set. Since this is the spot Fazbear chose for their attraction, it would make sense that they'd build it next to their pre-existing establishments. As I talked about earlier, this lake could also be responsible for the sinkhole under the Pizzaplex. And speaking of the Pizzaplex, that's the final piece of the puzzle. The coming soon screen from Help Wanted shows the Pizzaplex being built in an area extremely similar to the MCM plot of land, alongside this old pickup truck in a parking lot. The Pizzaplex is built above all these ruins, which explains why there's a sinkhole, and why all this old Fazbear imagery is piled on top of each other when Cassie explores the underground in Security Breach Ruin. The reason all this stuff happens on one plot of land is because this is where the Fazbear brand began. This is likely where Fredbear's singing show started, where William Afton and Henry Emily met and started working together. All in Hurricane. Although they went on to build other locations across the country, Utah was the root of the whole thing. So when Murray's Costume Manor was built on top of this land, it piqued to the attention of William and Henry, which is why they end up working with the Murrays on their restaurant project. They are the closest, and best, candidates for the job. But most importantly of all, they want the land. Throughout all of Secret of the Mimic, it's pretty clear that Afton is trying to make MCM go under, urging employees to leave the factory and join Fazbear Entertainment.
Ken, after one interview they offered me the job. It happened so quick. No questions about my work or skills. They asked one question, when can you start? I'm going to make double what I make here. You should come with me. There's a referral bonus if we can get more Murray employees to jump ship.
We are almost there. I need the rest of the Murray staff contact info. The sooner the better. You get that for me, and I can sweeten the deal. How would you like to manage one of our new franchise locations? Henry is in on it too, as he intentionally makes Edwin go bankrupt by constantly issuing change orders on the prototype Freddy's location. This is all about getting MCM to shut down, so Fazbear can grab its resources and start building on the land where it all started. Think about it. From a business standpoint, this was ideal for William and Henry, right next to a growing town, with plenty of space and the foundations of a building already under it. The place also held historic, sentimental value to the two, which is why they seized the land from Edwin as soon as possible. After the deal is done, Fazbear uses the actual land to build the first ever Freddy Fazbear's Pizza that opens in early 1983. But Afton goes deeper. He knows about the MCM Underground, the hidden tunnel project Edwin made under his factory, and he wants it. This is the foundation for the Circus Baby's bunker and the nightmare experiments. William wants to crack the code to possession, whether it's because of Crying Child's death or because of how mimics started acting paranormally after David and Fiona's deaths. After all, Fazbear's main goal in Secret of the Mimic is to retrieve not just the mimic's schematics, but also the endoskeleton itself. Why? So Afton can study it and understand how it works. So, with the basis for the bunker established, he uses the pre-existing rail connections to tie it to 3 major points: his house, Edwin's house, and the small hallway he used for the plush trap experiments between the town and MCM. And so, between 1983 and 1985, he uses this location as a testing ground for possession, and to build his funtime animatronics, inspired by the aesthetics of Edwin's creations. But eventually, in early 1985, Afton decides to open Circus Baby's Pizza World, a brand new Fazbear-backed location with state-of-the-art animatronics. His goal is simple: kidnap kids and move them to the nightmare experiments. While most think Afton's plan was for the Funtimes to kill the kids they kidnapped straight away, like what happened with Elizabeth, I don't think that's the case. Note how the tank on Funtime Freddy's blueprint is labeled as a storage tank. I think Afton's plan was for the Funtimes to kidnap kids and then move them by the rail to the nightmare experiments where he could figure out the secrets of possession. After all, why build a functional tank if the goal was just to kill them? But when Elizabeth got negatived by the claw, William realized that the sheer force of his machinery was too great for a small child to bear. The power of the impact was so strong it likely mangled any child that ended up inside. Thanks to a newspaper from the teasers leading up to Sister Location, we know Afton closed Circus Baby's Pizza World and thought of a good way to bring it back, but blamed the incident on gas leaks.
In other news, the grand opening of Circus Baby's Pizza World has apparently been cancelled due to reported gas leaks in the building. Sources close to the establishment question the report, saying that strange activity around the area at night suggests something else is to blame. One local is quoted as saying, "Everything just stopped. There was so much excitement built around this place opening, and then they just stopped talking about it. There's only a handful of people that ever got a look inside. Kids from here and there making sure everything worked right, you know. I guess they weren't quite as ready as they thought they were." A tenant from across the street claims to have witnessed a large group of cars surrounding the building during the night, and large pieces of equipment being taken out of the building under tarps. A few weeks later, the building was for sale. There is no comment yet from the local entrepreneur who financed the venture.
Seemingly, Afton had gas on the mind thanks to the nightmare experiments, but eventually decided they weren't practical enough. Going off of what he discovered with Elizabeth, he went out of his bunker and abandoned the nightmare experiments, going on to do the MCI later in 1985. Once he had verified those murders worked and possession happened, he abandoned his old house in Hurricane, near the already closed down Fredbear's, and moved to Edwin's house, which no longer housed the experiments. This is the house we see in Midnight Motorist, Curse of Dreadbear, and The Immortal and the Restless. It's possible that after he became an adult around that time, Michael Afton moved out of that house and back to Hurricane, explaining why he walks in that direction in the Sister Location cutscenes. Later on, after Afton's death, Fazbear kept using the same plot of land for its locations, up until the Pizzaplex. Alright, so that pretty much covers the main part of the evidence, and the timeline of all this. Now, I know what you're thinking. This evidence is pretty nice and all, but there's a significant portion of the story missing: the original trilogy. So far, FazPlot Theory has connected FNAF 4, Sister Location, FNAF 6, Help Wanted 2, Security Breach, and Secret of the Mimic to one plot of land. So pretty much all the mainline games, except for those first 3. But we can't connect FNAF 1, 2, and 3 to this. Or can we? Spoiler alert, we can. And that's what I'm gonna do now. Let's go in chronological order. While on stream, we discussed that juniors being placed over MCM could be an intentional choice to back up a theory that a lot of people hate, but is starting to make more and more sense. That juniors is actually the FNAF 2 location. Think about it. Not only is the name a reference to Edwin being Edwin Murray Jr., but the FNAF 2 location is also a younger, more kid-oriented version of Freddy's. The reason Afton isn't allowed inside the building is because all previous employees of that location were fired, as Phone Guy tells us on night 4 of FNAF 2.
Keep a close eye on things tonight, okay? From what I understand, the building is on lockdown. No one is allowed in or out, especially concerning any previous employees.
We know Afton worked at the 1987 location thanks to his gold badge in the Save Them minigame, and due to some other hints that Phone Guy gives us during FNAF 2. Basically, Afton went undercover and did what he had to do in this new restaurant. This means Midnight Motorist would have to take place in November 1987. It explains why it's raining, given the season, and ties it back to FNAF 2. The identity of the runaway is unclear, which is why this is still very much experimental, but it's a pretty good bet. But that's not all the evidence we have for FNAF 2 being involved in FazPlot theory. That's right, we're going back to Help Wanted. In the blacklight version of Help Wanted's entered vent repair level, we go down several floors of the Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals facility on an elevator. One of these floors is a near-perfect recreation of areas of the FNAF 2 pizzeria, complete with a toy and withered animatronics. If this location was above the Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals bunker, it means Afton could have grabbed the endoskeletons for the toys to use in his remnant experiments, explaining why he went there during FNAF 2. If his son Michael is Fred Smith from FNAF 2's Custom Night, it's also possible he was sent there to extract the endos, as he's caught tampering with the animatronics. Next up, an admittedly harder location to place. The FNAF 1 location. One of Fazbear's biggest flaws is that it failed to place the FNAF 1 location in the mess that is a stacked up sandwich it talked about, but I think I figured it out. Let's start with the obvious. The prototype Freddy's under MCM, while very similar to the private room, is also meant to line up with the FNAF 1 pizzeria layout. Why would William and Henry ask Edwin to build that whole underground location unless they wanted an identical one above it, or nearby? It's possible after MCM was cleared out that several Freddy's, like the one from 85, the one from 87, and finally the FNAF 1 building, were constructed on top of each other, or at least fairly close in the surroundings of Hurricane. But there's more. In the week before, an interactive novel set right before FNAF 1, we play as Ralph, aka the Phone Guy. The book's synopsis states that it's a direct prequel to the game, meaning it's almost definitely canon to the main lore. But anyway, here's the real bombshell that has me convinced FNAF 1 is tied to the FazPlot and is directly above the sister location bunker. On night 4, Ralph is tasked with rebooting the power in the building after it goes out by going to the building's breaker room. Unable to make it to the room normally, he has to go into the building's ventilation shafts. These vents go on in all directions until eventually, after several pages of crawling, Ralph makes it out. And what he sees is what ties it all together. Quote from the book: "This room is unfriendly to human life. Exposed power conduits run along the ceiling and power cables, and wires dangle down the walls and from the ceiling. The air around you buzzes with electricity. Sweat drips down your forehead and back as you study the power control panel. There are 5 round buttons, like elevator buttons, faintly glowing green." The FNAF 1 building map is never shown to have a breaker room. In fact, there's only one location in this entire franchise that has a dedicated breaker room. That's right, Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals. So I took a closer look at that room, and lo and behold, it's a perfect match for this exact description. Not only are there countless wires and exposed power conduits all across the walls and ceiling, but the 5 buttons on the terminal Ralph mentions are present here as well. This is the same room, meaning the power grid of the sister location bunker could be connected to FNAF 1. That's why Ralph has to go through a maze of vents to even end up here, because of how isolated it is from the building. Cryonite brought up some other points to strengthen this idea in his original Fazbear video, but I won't reiterate everything he said here. My point is, this just makes sense. All this makes me pretty confident that FNAF 1 is also tied to the FazPlot, and is built in the same area together with all the rest. But Withered, I hear you ask, what about FNAF 3? How on earth can you connect FNAF 3 to the FazPlot? Well, don't worry. Let's go ahead and do it. I'll admit, FNAF 3 is the flimsiest connection, but Secret of the Mimic actually gave us a pretty good reason as to why it's in this mix as well. And yet again, it lies in the gift that keeps on giving, Proto-Freddy's. When Secret of the Mimic came out, theorists who got to the parachute ending noticed a really weird detail about one of the computer terminals down there. Instead of displaying the FNAF 1 map, or even the sister location map, it instead showed the FNAF 3 map. This building's layout didn't match Fazbear's Fright at all, and while most, myself included, accepted it as a simple error, I think it was intentional. What if FNAF 3 was a pre-planned location, and the building layout was stored somewhere in both MCM and Fazbear Entertainment's files? It could explain why the horror attraction was built the way it was, to be an accurate version of those old Freddy's from the 80s. Obviously, from a gameplay perspective, it wouldn't make sense for Scott Cawthon to make the FNAF 3 layout just FNAF 1 but even uglier, so he swapped around the building. But this explanation makes it fit pretty well. If FNAF 3 used to be a blueprint for a pizzeria that was later taken and used by the creators of the horror attraction on top of the FazPlot, it all clicks. Thematically speaking, it also makes sense to make the haunted house next to Hurricane, since that's where all these tragedies happened. It's also how Michael goes to work at Fazbear's Fright during FNAF 3, as he's the most likely candidate for the night guard there. With that, we've successfully managed to connect FNAF 1, 2, 3, 4, Sister Location, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, Help Wanted, Curse of Dreadbear, Security Breach plus Ruin, Help Wanted 2, and finally Secret of the Mimic to one shared location. Every single mainline game can be successfully tied to this one plot of land. What started as the origins of Fredbear's and the base for the Fallfest carnivals went through tons of different Fazbear locations up until the Mega Pizzaplex. I've spent this entire video talking about the evidence for FazPlot, what its narrative would be, and showing off how it makes things simpler for the timeline. But there's still one huge question we need to answer. Why? Why would Scott Cawthon, the greatest writer on Earth who makes Tolkien look like a worm, leave all these hints to FazPlot theory? Why does he want us to put the pieces together and tie all the locations to Murray's Costume Manor? This is the real question, the one that decides whether this theory makes sense or not. And I think I've got the answer. I think Scott has several reasons to tie everything together to one shared location. First off, narratively speaking, it portrays the amount of damage Fazbear did to the place where it was based. Dozens, maybe even hundreds of people from the area died, went missing, or sustained severe injuries. Homes were lost, lives destroyed, all because of one thing: greed. Greed is what powered the Fazbear founders to seize the MCM property, what convinced Afton to experiment with more and more possession, and kept the company going despite its multiple failures. Having all this take place on one plot of land really amplifies the impact the story of Five Nights at Freddy's has. There's also Henry's monologue, where he describes gathering everyone and everything in one place to burn it all down. That place isn't just a random pizzeria. That pizzeria is built on the ruins of where it all started, where the first death tied to Fazbear happened, the place where William's reign of terror truly began. Placing all these locations in one place ties the narrative up until FNAF 6 in a neat bow. It explains why Henry was compelled to gather everything up, why he chose that place, and how the Fazbear tragedies affected the people of Hurricane, Utah. But from a lore-building standpoint, this helps clear up a lot of the confusion regarding Fazbear's reach, and how big the franchise is in terms of space. Sure, Fazbear Entertainment's definitely got locations outside Utah, but keeping the action in one area simplifies the story and keeps it tight and condensed. It also allows us to draw really cool thematic and literal parallels, which is basically what I've been doing this entire video. I think with Secret of the Mimic, Scott's goal was to condense the story of Five Nights at Freddy's, and explain how it all ties back to this one location. The build-up to Murray's Costume Manor in Security Breach and Ruin also shows this, with how the old locations are all smushed together under the Pizzaplex. It's Scott dropping hints that everything is connected. It also clears up some confusion about what I like to call the Afton housing crisis. The Afton house from the FNAF 4 minigames, the Afton house from the FNAF 4 gameplay, and the Afton house from Midnight Motorist are all very different. But by having Edwin Murray's house become one of these locations later on, Scott is clarifying this weird plot hole. Overall, I think that's what FazPlot is all about. It's Scott clarifying things we didn't understand. The origins of Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals, Midnight Motorist, the locations of all these pizzerias, the FNAF 4 experiments, the list goes on and on. The lake imagery from Curse of Dreadbear especially makes me think this is intentional. It's all very knowingly placed, and done in such a way that leaves breadcrumbs for the future games. So, is FazPlot true? Is this the story Scott wanted to write? Is every single mainline game placed in the same 10 square kilometer radius? I can confidently say, yes. All the evidence T-Dreads, Corey, Connie, and I gathered on that stream, as well as all the discoveries we made after it, makes me certain that at least a very large portion of this was intended, and that Scott and Steelwall have been building up to it since the beginning of the modern era. FazPlot, like Fazburger, has too much going for it to hand-wave away, and whether the entirety of what I said is true or not, there's definitely a lot to this. Thank you so much for watching my most ambitious theory project yet. This took a lot of work to write and produce, and I'm happy to be able to show you the finished product. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Stay safe, and keep on theorizing.